In an American emergency room tonight, a silent crisis is unfolding. A deaf patient has a 70% chance of being unable to communicate with the team trying to save her life. For one woman, that statistic was about to become a terrifying reality until a stranger noticed and a billionaire watched. The patient was Ilara Vance, the only daughter of tech mogul Alastair Vance. From his own hospital bed, recovering from emergency surgery, he watched on a hallway monitor as nurses tried and failed to understand his daughter. By law, they were required to provide a qualified interpreter. In that moment, none was coming, and into that silence walked a man named Leo. Leo had been at the hospital for over an hour before he even saw Ilara. His 7-year-old daughter, Chloe, had fallen from the monkey bars during recess, and the school nurse insisted on an X-ray to rule out a wrist fracture. He'd come straight from a construction site, his knuckles still dusted with drywall mud, the knees of his cargo pants stained with grass from kneeling next to Chloe on the playground. He was 34 years old, and on days like this, he felt every one of them. The kind of tired that sat in the bones. His coffee, bought from a vending machine, was cold and bitter in a paper cup. Chloe, her wrist wrapped in a makeshift splint, was asleep against his side, her small weight both an anchor and the only thing keeping him upright. He was a foreman for a small residential builder. The pay was decent, the hours were long, and the health insurance was a constant negotiation. Chloe's mother, Sophia, had left when Chloe was just a toddler. There was no dramatic fight, no single incident, just a gradual erosion, a young woman who realized she wasn't built for the relentless quiet of parenthood in a small apartment. She moved to the West Coast to, as she put it, find her breath. She sent postcards sometimes. Leo had learned to stop waiting for them. He and Chloe had built their own world, a world of library books and Saturday morning pancakes, and a language that was half spoken, half signed. Because Chloe had been born with moderate hearing loss, it wasn't profound, but it was enough. Enough that her early speech was delayed, enough that daycare had been a storm of frustration. Leo had thrown himself into learning American Sign Language with the same dogged determination he applied to reading blueprints. He took night classes at the community college until his eyes blurred. He practiced with online videos until his hands ached. It wasn't charity, it was a bridge. It was how he reached his daughter. Now at 7, Chloe was bilingual, flipping between spoken English and ASL with the effortless code switching of a child who lives in two worlds. For Leo, signing wasn't just a skill. It was an extension of love, muscle memory etched by necessity. Across town, in a penthouse that overlooked the city's glittering skyline, Ilara Vance was trying to get ready for a charity gala. At 28, she was the head of the Vance Foundation's Disability Inclusion Initiatives. A title bestowed by her father, Alastair, but a mission she had forged herself. She had been profoundly deaf since the age of 2, following a severe case of meningitis. She'd been raised with every advantage, the best oral deaf education, then Gallaudet University, where she embraced ASL as her primary language and found her cultural home. She was dressing when the pain hit, a sharp, insistent cramp low in her abdomen. She dismissed it at first, stress maybe, but within 20 minutes it had intensified, a hot knot of pressure that made her double over. She texted her assistant Maya, who was downstairs in the car. "Something's wrong, severe pain, need to go to ER." Maya, who was hearing and whose ASL was functional but slow, rushed up. They tried to communicate, but Ilara's signs became jagged with pain, her facial grammar collapsing into a grimace. Maya fumbled, asking questions Ilara couldn't focus to answer. This was the first crack in the system. The person meant to facilitate her communication was suddenly part of the barrier. The triage nurse at County General's ER was named Linda. She was kind, overworked, and had no training in deaf awareness. When Ilara and Maya approached, Ilara tried to sign, pain, stomach, bad. Maya spoke over her, translating in broken fragments. "She has a stomachache, really bad." The word appendicitis didn't cross the gap. Linda handed Ilara a clipboard with a form. "Honey, I need you to fill this out. Rate your pain from 1 to 10. Ilara stared at the form, then at Maya, who was now on her phone trying to call the family's usual interpreter service. It was after 5 p.m. The service said the soonest available certified interpreter was 45 minutes away. 45 minutes. For a condition that can turn fatal in hours. Ilara was escorted to a bed in a curtained bay. The pain was worsening, a deep, alarming throb. A young resident came in, introduced himself loudly and slowly, as if volume could penetrate her deafness. He pointed to his own abdomen. "Does it hurt here?" Ilara nodded, but the specific location, the migration of pain that is the classic sign of appendicitis, was lost. He needed to know when it started, what it felt like, her medical history. He held up his pen and notepad. "Write it down," he asked. Ilara's hands were trembling. Writing in English, her second language, under duress, was like trying to solve algebra while on fire. She managed a few words. "Pain, right side, started 2 hours." It was insufficient. Critical details were missing. This was the crisis point. The ADA mandates effective communication, but in that buzzing, fluorescent-lit bay, the mandate was just words on a page. The video remote interpreter cart was wheeled in. The screen flickered to life, revealing an interpreter in a headset, but the Wi-Fi in the ER was overloaded. The video froze, stuttered, then dropped the call entirely. The resident sighed, a gesture of frustration Ilara saw clearly. He looked at his pager, then back at her. The message was unmistakable. "You are a problem taking up too much time." He left to attend to other patients, the curtain swishing shut behind him. Ilara was alone with the pain and a rising tide of panic. This was the systemic failure in real time. The law existed, the technology existed, but the will and the workflow had broken down. Leo in the waiting room felt Chloe stir. Her x-ray was done, they were just waiting for the radiologist's read. He stood to stretch his legs, walking Chloe to the water fountain. That's when he saw her, a woman in a silk blouse, now wrinkled, sitting upright on a gurney just beyond the central nurse's station. Her face was pale, etched with pain and something else, a profound, isolated frustration. He saw her hands move, not random gestures, but the clear, structured patterns of ASL. She was signing to herself, a self-soothing, desperate mantra. "Help, need help, understand, please." He stopped walking. He knew that look. It was the look Chloe had before they found their language, the look of someone trapped behind a wall of silence. He watched a nurse approach, speak quickly, and then walk away when the woman didn't respond. The nurse hadn't even seen the signs. Leo's own problems, the cold coffee, the waiting, the worry about Chloe's wrist, shrank to a tiny point. Here was a clear, present need. He knelt down to Chloe's level, signing as he spoke. "I see a person who needs help communicating. I'm going to go ask if I can assist. You stay right here with your book, okay?" Chloe nodded, her eyes serious. "Tell her it's going to be okay," she signed back. Leo approached the gurney slowly, making sure he was in Ilara's sight line. He didn't speak. He raised his hands and signed, clear and slow. "Hello, my name is Leo. I use ASL. I see you are in pain. Can I help you communicate with the doctors?" The change in Ilara's face was instantaneous. The isolation shattered. Her shoulders, which had been hunched around her ears, dropped. She let out a breath that was almost a sob. Her hands flew up in response, the signs rushed but eloquent with relief. "Yes, please, appendicitis, I think. Pain started here, moved here. Allergic to penicillin. History of endometriosis." In a glass-walled private suite on the same floor, Alistair Vance was fighting his own pain. Emergency gallstone surgery. The medication made him foggy, but the monitor in his room, meant to display his vitals, had a feed from the hallway camera. He'd been staring absently at it, watching the blur of hospital traffic. Then he saw his daughter on the gurney. He saw her distress, the failed interactions. His billionaire's instinct to solve problems, to control outcomes, flared impotently. He was trapped in a bed. He watched, jaw tight, as a stranger in work boots approached her. He saw the man's hands begin to move. He saw the transformation on Ilara's face, the relief, the sudden channeling of her will. A stranger had done in 30 seconds what the entire hospital system had failed to do in 45 minutes. He pressed the call button for his personal assistant, David, who was dozing in the corner chair. His voice was a hoarse command. "David, the man with my daughter. Find out everything about him. Who is he?" For the next 22 minutes, Leo became Ilara Vance's voice. He stood at her bedside, his work boots planted on the linoleum, his hands moving with a calm, steady precision that belied the chaos around them. He relayed her medical history, the penicillin allergy, the endometriosis, to the resident, whose demeanor shifted from frustrated to focused. He interpreted the surgeon's rapid-fire questions about the pain's migration. When the nurse came to start an IV, Leo explained the procedure to Ilara, signing where the needle would go, why it was necessary. The simple act of knowing what was coming allowed her to hold still, to cooperate. The surgeon, a woman named Dr. Evans, looked from Ilara's face to Leo's hands and gave a single, decisive nod. "Tell her it's appendicitis. We're taking her to surgery now." Leo signed the diagnosis. Ilara signed back, her movements weak but clear. "Thank you, tell my father." Alistair Vance, Suite 401. Upstairs, Alistair Vance watched the monitor, his surgical pain dulled by a cocktail of opioids and a sharper, more familiar sensation, strategic curiosity. He saw the efficiency of the interaction once communication was established. He saw the medical team mobilize. He saw his daughter's posture change from defensive to collaborative. David, now fully awake, was already tapping on his tablet. "I'll pull security footage, get a name from registration," David said. "No," Alistair replied, his voice raspy but firm. "Don't spook him. He just helped my daughter. Watch, learn. I want to know who he is, but I want to know why he is. What's his context?" Down in the waiting room, Chloe tugged on Leo's sleeve. The radiologist had given the all-clear, just a bad sprain. As they were leaving, a hospital administrator, a man in a suit with a laminated badge, intercepted them. "Sir, I need to speak with you about your interaction with another patient." His tone was polite but carried the weight of institutional policy. Leo felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. "I was just trying to help. She was in pain. No one could understand her." The administrator nodded. "We appreciate the intent, but uncredentialed individuals acting as interpreters pose a significant liability risk. Patient confidentiality, medical accuracy, you understand." Leo did understand. He'd heard versions of this before. The world loved the idea of help until it involved actual liability. "What was the alternative?" Leo asked, keeping his voice low for Chloe's sake. "She'd been waiting 45 minutes for your video interpreter that didn't work. Was she supposed to just wait longer while her appendix ruptured?" The administrator didn't have an answer. He simply handed Leo a card. "If you have concerns about patient accessibility, you can file a report with this office. Have a good evening." In the car, Chloe was full of questions. Is the lady going to be okay? Did the doctors understand her after you helped? Leo assured her Ilara was in surgery and would be fine. But his mind was on the administrator's card, on the cool dismissal masked as procedure. He thought of the countless times he'd advocated for Chloe in schools, in doctors' offices, fighting for the accommodations that were her right. This felt like that, but bigger. A woman with every financial resource in the world had been failed by the same system. David's investigation began with the path of least resistance. He called the Vance Foundation's head of security, who had a contact in the hospital's IT department. Within an hour, he had a name from the patient registration system linked to a child seen for a wrist injury, Leo Torres. The rest was a flood of digital breadcrumbs. Public records, social media minimal, property records, employment history. David compiled a dossier. Leo Torres, age 34. Formerly enlisted, Army Corps of Engineers. Honorable discharge. Currently a foreman for Henderson Residential Builders. Owned a small mortgage townhouse in the Brookfield district. Single father to one child, Chloe Torres, age 7. And then the key piece, a local news article from 3 years prior from the Brookfield Gazette. The headline, "Father's Fight for Deaf Daughter Leads to New School District Policy." David read it aloud to Alistair, who was now sitting up in bed, more alert. The article detailed how Leo had petitioned the school board after Chloe's kindergarten teacher refused to wear the FM microphone that transmitted her voice directly to Chloe's hearing aids. The teacher called it disruptive. Leo, armed with printouts of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, had attended 6 consecutive school board meetings. He'd brought Chloe, who signed to the board about how she couldn't hear her friends when the teacher turned the microphone off. He didn't yell. He presented facts. He demonstrated the technology. He won. The district implemented a mandatory training program for all staff on auditory accessibility devices. "He's not just a guy who knows sign language," David concluded. "He's an advocate, a stubborn, quiet, effective one." Alistair stared at the grainy photo from the article, Leo standing next to his daughter, his hand on her shoulder. "A soldier, a builder, and a father who fights bureaucracies," Alistair mused. "And he just happened to be in the right place to do what my $1 million annual foundation hasn't been able to guarantee for my own child." There was no jealousy in his voice. It was the tone of an engineer finding a component that fit a problem he'd been trying to solve. The Vance Foundation had donated millions to hospital wings and medical research, but its disability inclusion initiatives, run by Ilara, often hit walls of institutional inertia. They funded interpreter scholarships, but that didn't fix the broken logistics in a crowded ER. They sponsored awareness training, but it was often the first thing cut from hospital budgets. Alastair saw a disconnect between the money at the top and the reality on the ground. And in Leo Torres, he saw someone who lived in that reality, who navigated it daily, and who had just proven he could change its outcome in a crisis. Ilara was out of surgery and in recovery when Alastair, against doctor's orders, had David wheel him to her room. She was groggy but alert. Her first question signed slowly, "The man, Leo." Alastair, who had learned basic ASL when Ilara was a child but was far from fluent, finger-spelled slowly. "Okay, HELPD," then he spoke aloud with David translating into more fluent signs. "I saw on the camera, he was effective." Ilara's eyes welled up. She signed, her movements softened by medication but intense. "He wasn't just a conduit, he was a buffer. They were impatient with me, asterisk. They were patient with asterisk him, that's the problem. They see an interpreter as a tool for me. They should see my deafness as a part of me they need to accommodate." It was the core insight, born of a lifetime of such moments, but crystallized in the trauma of that ER bay. Meanwhile, Leo was back at his townhouse, making dinner for Chloe. The incident at the hospital buzzed in the back of his mind like a trapped fly. The relief of helping was now mixed with the sour aftertaste of the administrator's warning. He knew he'd done the right thing, but the system had a way of punishing right things that bypassed its protocols. His phone buzzed with a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared from the same number. "Mr. Torres, this is David Way, assistant to Alastair Vance. Mr. Vance and his daughter Ilara would like to express their gratitude for your assistance today. Would you be open to a meeting tomorrow?" Leo stared at the text. Billionaires didn't send thank you notes. They sent lawyers or checks. A meeting felt like a different category entirely. Chloe, reading his expression, signed, "Who is it? Trouble?" Leo signed back, "I don't know yet." The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at the Vance Foundation offices, a sleek, glass-walled building in the city's innovation district. Leo wore his one suit, bought for a friend's wedding 5 years ago. He felt like an imposter. David Way met him in the lobby, all polite efficiency, and led him to a conference room with a view that could make you dizzy. Alastair Vance was there, looking paler than his publicity photos, but radiating a focused energy. And next to him, in a chair, was Ilara. She was dressed in casual clothes, a blanket over her lap, her expression sharp and curious. Alastair spoke first. "Mr. Torres, thank you for coming. My daughter has informed me that you likely saved her from a ruptured appendix and a significantly more complicated recovery. The hospital's failure was my failure. I fund initiatives to prevent exactly what happened to her, yet it happened." He was direct, conceding fault in a way that disarmed Leo's defensiveness. Ilara raised her hands and signed. David translated aloud. He's skipping to the end. "What we want to know is, what did you see in that ER? Not the medical part, the communication part." Leo took a breath. He spoke plainly, looking at Ilara as he did, knowing David was signing for her. "I saw a system that viewed you as a problem to be managed, not a person to be treated. The nurse with the clipboard, the doctor talking too loud, the broken video screen, they were all hurdles. Your pain was secondary to the inconvenience of accessing it. I've seen it with my daughter. When the process becomes the focus, the person gets lost." Ilara nodded vigorously, then signed a long, passionate response. David translated, trying to keep up with her pace. "He gets it. That's it exactly. The law says effective communication, but hospitals check the box by having a VRI cart in a closet. They don't train staff on how to use it, or when to call a live interpreter, or how to interact with a deaf person while waiting. The policy exists on paper. The practice fails in reality. The gap between the two is where people get hurt." Alastair leaned forward. "My foundation has thrown money at the policy side for years. Grants, equipment donations. It hasn't fixed the gap. You, Mr. Torres, operated in the gap. You fixed a critical failure in real time with no resources because you had the skill and the will. I'm not interested in giving you a check. I'm interested in your perspective. How would you fix the system? Not from a boardroom, from the ground, from the waiting room chair." The question hung in the air. It was vast. Leo thought of Chloe, of the endless meetings, the gentle but firm insistence required to get a school to follow the law. He thought of the administrator's card in his wallet. You can't fix it from the top down, Leo said slowly, because the problem isn't a lack of stuff. It's a lack of accountability in the moment. The nurse who handed over the clipboard, she wasn't malicious. She was following the path of least resistance. There was no immediate consequence for her when it failed. He paused, an idea forming, rough and unpolished. What if the consequence wasn't a lawsuit later, but a visible metric right then? What if patients and families could immediately flag a communication breakdown, not to complain, but to trigger a mandated, immediate solution? And what if that solution wasn't just an interpreter, but required the staff who failed to get trained, not in a year, but next week? Ilara's eyes lit up. She signed rapidly. David translated, a real-time feedback loop, not punitive, but corrective. You break the chain, you fix the chain immediately. You make the gap visible and force the system to close it itself. Alastair was silent for a long moment, looking from his daughter's excited face to Leo's cautious one. He saw something new, a partnership between lived experience and pragmatic action. I want to pilot that, Alastair said finally, here at County General, and I want you two to design it. He looked at Leo. You'd be a consultant, paid of course. Your job would be to think of everything that can go wrong because you've lived it. Ilara's job is to represent the patient's needs. My job is to apply pressure and funding to make the hospital say yes. Leo felt the world tilt. An hour ago he was a foreman worried about drywall deliveries. Now a billionaire was offering him a job to redesign part of a hospital. I have a job, Leo said. I have a daughter. This would be part-time, Alastair countered. Flexible hours, and I suspect Chloe would think it's important. He had done his homework. Leo looked at Ilara. She signed slowly so he could understand without translation. Please help me fix this for the next person. Leo left the foundation offices with a temporary security badge and a mind reeling. The scale of it was terrifying. He was being asked to step into a world of wealth and influence to fight a battle he'd only ever fought on a small, personal scale. That night, as he read to Chloe, she asked about the meeting. He tried to explain. They want me to help make hospitals better for people who are deaf, like the lady yesterday. Chloe thought about this, then signed, so you're going to teach them how to listen, out of the mouths of babes. Yeah, honey, Leo signed back, something like that. The first meeting with County General Administration was scheduled for the following week. Alastair's influence guaranteed the audience. The chief medical officer, the head of nursing, the patient experience director, and the legal counsel. David prepared a sleek presentation. Ilara and Leo prepared something else. They prepared the truth. The night before the meeting, Leo got a call from an unknown number again. This time he answered. It was the hospital administrator who'd stopped him in the waiting room. His voice was strained. Mr. Torres, I understand you're meeting with leadership tomorrow about accessibility improvements. I just wanted to say, my remarks the other day were about policy, not about the quality of your help. It was a retreat, a preemptive defense. Leo simply said, I understand, I'll see you tomorrow. He hung up, feeling a new kind of power. The kind that comes not from authority, but from having a billionaire's ear and a righteous cause. The conference room at County General was tense. The administrators clearly saw this as a Vance Foundation PR initiative, something to be managed. David presented the broad vision, the real-time communication access protocol. When he finished, the legal counsel spoke first. The liability concerns are immense. Encouraging non-credentialed intervention, creating new reporting pathways outside established channels, it's a minefield. Then Ilara raised her hand. She signed, her face a mask of calm intensity. Leo, sitting beside her, voiced for the room, I'm not a PR initiative. I'm a former patient who last week experienced a failure of your established channels. The minefield already exists. Your patients are walking through it every day. We're offering you a map. She let that sit. Then she added, my father's foundation funds a $12 million elective surgery suite in this hospital's new wing. That donation is currently under review. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The financial pressure was now explicit, personal, and immense. The chief medical officer, a weary-looking man named Dr. Singh, turned to Leo. And you, Mr. Torres, you're the proposed ground consultant. You're not a medical professional. What do you bring to this that we don't already have? Leo met his gaze. He thought of Chloe, of the administrator's card, of the nurse who walked away from Ilara. I bring the perspective of someone who has to use the system you built, not administer it. I bring the knowledge of what it feels like when it fails. And I bring a simple question: what is your protocol for a deaf patient in an emergency when your video interpreter fails and your on-call interpreter is 45 minutes away? Not what's on paper. Actually happens right now on the floor. The room was silent. No one had an answer that didn't sound hollow. In that silence, the first brick of the old way of thinking began to crack. But as the meeting adjourned with a commitment to explore next steps, Leo caught the exchanged glances between the administrators. They had agreed under pressure, but the real battle, the battle to change minds, not just policies, was just beginning. And Leo was now squarely, dangerously in the middle of it. The exploration phase was a masterclass in bureaucratic inertia. For 3 weeks, Leo and Ilara were given access to a stakeholder working group that met for 1 hour every Tuesday. It was populated by mid-level managers with no power to change policy. The same legal counsel who had called the project a minefield now nitpicked every suggestion. The proposed real-time feedback system, a simple tablet-based alert that would ping the charge nurse and hospital administrator when a communication breakdown was flagged, was deemed a workflow disruption. The mandatory, immediate training for staff who failed, unions won't allow it, said the head of nursing. We have a yearly competency module that covers disability awareness. Leo sat through these meetings, feeling the heat of silent resentment. He was an outsider, a construction worker, telling medical professionals how to do their jobs. Ilara, still recovering, attended via video call, her frustration visible in the tight set of her jaw. After the third meeting, she signed off early. David texted Leo. She's exhausted. They're wearing her down with process talk. The countermove came not as a frontal assault, but as a quiet sidelining. Leo was told his on-floor observations, sitting in the ER waiting room, noting interactions, required formal ethics approval that could take months. Then, his temporary security badge was mysteriously deactivated. When he called to get it reinstated, he was told there was a moratorium on non-essential consultant access. The message was clear: stay out. Meanwhile, Alistair Vance was playing a longer, harder game. He directed the foundation to quietly commission an independent audit of County General's ADA compliance over the past 5 years. The preliminary findings were damning: over 200 documented patient complaints about communication access, most resolved with a form letter and no systemic change. The $12 million donation for the new surgery suite was officially put on pause, pending a review of the hospital's commitment to equitable care. The financial pressure was a lever, but the hospital board, filled with old money donors, pushed back. They saw Alistair as a new money bully trying to force a pet project. The battle lines were drawn: innovation versus tradition, external pressure versus institutional sovereignty. For Leo, the personal cost began to mount. His boss at Henderson Builders pulled him aside. "Leo, I've had calls, people asking about your reliability. This hospital thing is becoming a distraction. You need to be here physically and mentally." Leo's consulting fee from the Vance Foundation was generous, but it was temporary. His real job, with its health insurance for Chloe, was on the line. He was caught between two worlds, failing at both. One night, helping Chloe with homework, she signed, "You're sad a lot." He couldn't deny it. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night, almost 2 months after Ilara's appendectomy. A 68-year-old deaf man named Arthur Green was brought into County General's ER by his neighbor after a fall. Arthur used ASL. The triage nurse, the same Linda from Ilara's visit, remembered the protocol vaguely. She requested a video interpreter. The cart was wheeled out. The connection, again, failed. The on-call interpreter service said they were experiencing high volume, wait time 30 minutes. Arthur, confused and in pain from a likely broken hip, tried to write notes, but his hands were shaking. The resident on duty, pressed and impatient, made a decision. He used the neighbor, a hearing man who knew maybe 50 signs, as an interpreter. Critical questions about medications, about dizziness before the fall, about pain location, were lost in translation. Arthur was admitted for observation with a diagnosis of generalized weakness. The next morning, a different doctor reviewed the case. Something felt off. He tracked down a certified interpreter. Through her, Arthur explained he felt a sudden sharp pain in his hip after standing up from the couch. He had fallen in the traditional sense. His leg had given way. The new information prompted an immediate MRI. It revealed a pathological fracture, a break caused by a hidden tumor. The delayed diagnosis meant a night of unnecessary pain and a more complicated treatment pathway. Arthur's daughter, a lawyer, was furious. She didn't just file a complaint, she called the local investigative news desk. The story broke with the headline, "Hospital's Repeated Failure Leaves Deaf Patient with Undiagnosed Cancer." It named County General. It detailed the broken VRI, the use of an unqualified interpreter, the delay. And then the investigative reporter did what reporters do. She looked for patterns. She found the audit commissioned by the Vance Foundation through a public records request. She found the 200 previous complaints. And then she found Ilara Vance's story. A source inside the hospital, a nurse disillusioned by the resistance to change, leaked the broad strokes. The billionaire's daughter, the failed communication, the random dad who stepped in, and the subsequent, stalled, initiative to fix the problem. Suddenly, the narrative exploded. It was no longer a story about one hospital's failing. It was a story about systemic neglect, about the wealthy trying and failing to force change, and about the ordinary people caught in the middle. The news segment aired footage of the hospital's gleaming facade, then cut to a grainy photo of Leo and Chloe from the old school board article. They called him the unlikely interpreter. They painted him as a hero, but also as a pawn in a war between a billionaire and a hospital. The fallout was immediate and toxic. County General's public relations team went into overdrive, issuing statements about their unwavering commitment to all patients. Privately, the board was in chaos. The old money donors, fearing the scandal would tarnish their names, turned on the administration. "Why wasn't this fixed?" became the angry refrain. The chief medical officer, Dr. Singh, was forced to resign. For Leo, the media attention was a nightmare. Reporters camped outside his townhouse. They approached Chloe's school. His boss at Henderson Builders called him into the office and with genuine regret let him go. "The distraction is too great, Leo. The company's image, I'm sorry." The temporary consulting fee was now his only income, and the project was in shambles. He felt exposed, used, and furious. He called David Way, his voice tight. "This wasn't the plan. My daughter's life is now a news story. I just lost my job." Alistair Vance watched the scandal unfold from his penthouse. He saw the hospital board crumbling. He saw the public outrage. And he saw an opportunity born from disaster. He summoned his team, including a chastened and furious Leo and a resolute Ilara. "The landscape has changed," Alistair said, his voice cold and focused. "They are now vulnerable. We are no longer petitioners. We are the solution they desperately need to embrace to survive. We rewrite the proposal. Not as a pilot, as a mandatory hospital-wide overhaul, and we present it not to the administrators, but to the full board, with the media waiting outside." This was the pivot. The wait, it gets worse, moment had happened to the hospital, not to Leo. The failure had become so public, so damaging, that the institution's survival instinct kicked in. The very resistance that had stalled them now became the reason for their surrender. Leo, however, was broken. He looked at Alistair at the sleek war room and felt a profound disconnect. "I can't be your poster child," he said. "I can't do the media circuit. I need to find a job. I need to protect my daughter." Ilara, who had been silent, stood up. She walked over to Leo, placed a hand on his arm to get his attention, and then signed slowly and directly with David voicing, "You're right. This became a circus, and I am so sorry for what it cost you. But Arthur Green is real. My story was real. If we walk away now, the hospital will just hire a PR firm and install a new plaque. Nothing will change. We have to see it through, not for my father, for Arthur, for the next person." She paused, her expression fierce. "And you shouldn't have to choose between doing what's right and paying your mortgage. My father will make sure of that." Alistair nodded, a rare expression of contrition on his face. "She's right. I handled the pressure badly. I made you a target. Let me fix that." The consulting role becomes a full-time position with benefits at the foundation. You design and implement this protocol not just here, but anywhere we roll it out. You have a job, Leo, a mission, and we will shield your daughter from this spotlight with every resource I have. It was an offer he couldn't refuse, but more than that, it was a ladder out of the pit of despair. He had lost his old life, but a new, terrifying, purposeful one was being offered. He thought of Chloe, of Arthur Green, of the nurse who walked away. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, "but we do it my way, on the floor, with the nurses, not against them." The proposal to the hospital board was a 72-page document, but its core was simple. It was called the Clear Path Protocol. It mandated three things. First, every ER staff member would undergo a 4-hour, in-person deaf equity and communication training, not yearly, but immediately in rotating shifts. Second, the VRI system would be replaced and maintained by a dedicated, in-house IT person with a backup landline to a live interpreter service. Third, and most radically, any patient or family member could trigger a Clear Path alert via a tablet or button, which would immediately summon a supervisor and a certified interpreter and automatically log the incident for review. No blame, just a forced solution. The board, facing the glare of cameras and the collapse of their reputation, approved it in an emergency session. The vote was unanimous. The headlines the next day read, "Hospital surrenders to reform after scandal." But the real work was just beginning. The approval was on paper. The implementation would be a war fought in the trenches of the ER, shift by shift, nurse by nurse. And Leo Torres, former foreman, now the Foundation's Director of Accessibility Implementation, would be on the front lines. As he walked into County General on the first day of the new protocol, a permanent ID badge around his neck, he felt the weight of 100 skeptical stares. The battle of ideas was over. The battle for hearts and minds was about to begin, and this time there was no going back. The first week of the Clear Path Protocol felt less like implementation and more like occupation. Leo stood in the ER, his new badge feeling foreign as nurses deliberately looked through him. The training sessions were scheduled, but the sign-up sheets remained empty. The new video interpreting equipment, state-of-the-art and hardwired for reliability, sat unused. The head nurse, a woman named Brenda with 30 years on the floor, made her position clear without saying a word. She posted the mandatory training schedule next to the already overcrowded shift board, a visual statement of burden. Leo's strategy, forged on construction sites, was simple. He showed up. He didn't lecture. He arrived with a giant carafe of good coffee and a box of pastries. He took the night shift when tensions were high and patience was low. He watched. He saw a nurse struggle to get a history from a deaf patient using scribbled notes. He waited until the nurse stepped away, then approached quietly. "I can help with that if you want," he said. The nurse, weary and behind, shrugged. "Knock yourself out." Leo sat with the patient, an elderly man who signed slowly. He got the history: chest pain radiating to the left arm, history of hypertension. He translated it concisely for the nurse. The nurse, seeing the clear, actionable information, nodded. "Thanks." It wasn't warmth, but it was recognition of utility. That was the crack Leo needed. The real turning point came 10 days in. A deaf teenager was brought in after a skateboarding accident. He was scared, in pain, and his signs were frantic. The nurse assigned to him, a young man named Mark, looked at the new Clear Path tablet on the wall, then at Leo. He made a decision. He walked over and pressed the alert button. A soft chime sounded at the nurse's station, and a notification flashed on the charge nurse's screen. Within 90 seconds, Brenda was there, and the on-call video interpreter was on screen. The system worked. Mark, following the new protocol, stayed with the patient, making eye contact, while the interpreter on screen handled the medical questions. The teen calmed down. Afterward, Brenda looked at the tablet log, then at Mark, then at Leo. She gave a single, grunted approval, faster than hunting someone down. Compliance, however, is not the same as belief. The mandatory 4-hour trainings began. Leo co-facilitated with Ilara. They didn't start with laws or liability. They started with a simulation. They paired up staff. One wore earplugs and a blindfold over their eyes. The other had to convey a complex medical instruction using only gestures and written notes. The frustration was immediate, visceral. Then Ilara would talk about what it's like to be in that state of sensory deprivation while also being in pain or fear. She talked about the difference between a qualified interpreter and a family member, not as policy, but as the difference between dignity and dependence. Slowly, the culture began to shift. It wasn't a revolution, it was a thaw. Nurses started asking Leo questions. How do I get a deaf patient's attention if their back is turned? What's the difference between ASL and signed English? Leo answered plainly, often using Chloe as an example. He became not the Billionaire's enforcer, but the in-house expert. Ilara, now fully recovered, began making regular, unannounced visits to the ER, not as a patient, but as a consultant. She'd chat with staff in the break room, her presence normalizing deafness as a part of the community they served, not a problem to be solved. 6 months in, the data started to tell its own story. Patient satisfaction scores for deaf and hard of hearing individuals in the ER had risen by 60%. The average time from triage to initial assessment for those patients had dropped by 18 minutes. There had been zero formal complaints about communication access. The board, which had approved the protocol under duress, now saw it as a point of pride. The local paper ran a follow-up story, From Scandal to Model, County General's Quiet Revolution in Care. For Leo, the new normal was a strange amalgamation of worlds. He had an office at the Vance Foundation with a view, but he spent most of his time in hospitals. He wore a collared shirt but kept a pair of work boots under his desk. His salary provided stability he and Chloe had never known. He could say yes to school trips, to music lessons. The shadow of precariousness lifted. Chloe, now 8, signed, "You help people find their words." It was the perfect description. His relationship with Ilara deepened, forged in the friction of shared purpose. They spent hours debriefing, planning, arguing over details. Their communication evolved into a seamless blend of speech and sign, a private dialect. One evening, working late at the foundation, Ilara turned to him. "You know, I've never seen your face," she signed, "but I think I know it better than anyone else." Leo, who had grown accustomed to her directness, signed back, "What's your version look like?" She smiled, kind, tired around the eyes, a good smile you don't use enough. He realized she was right. Alistair Vance watched the success with a strategist's satisfaction. But the surprising detail, the one he didn't publicize, was his own transformation. He started taking ASL lessons again, serious ones, not just to talk to his daughter, but to understand the world she navigated. He funded not just the rollout of the Clear Path protocol to 3 other hospital systems, but also scholarships for deaf students in medical fields. The mission had shifted from fixing a problem for his child to fixing a system for everyone. The final test came a year after the protocol's launch. A major multi-car accident flooded County General's ER with patients. It was chaos, the kind of high-pressure scenario where old habits resurface. Amid the triage, an elderly deaf woman was wheeled in. She was disoriented, signing incoherently. A seasoned nurse, Brenda, now the protocol's biggest advocate on the floor, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the tablet, hit the alert, and while the interpreter connected, she did what the training taught her. She held the woman's hand, made sure she was in her sight line, and mouthed clearly, "We're here, you're safe." The system worked because the humanity behind it did. The Clear Path model became a blueprint. The Vance Foundation, with Leo and Ilara at the helm, packaged it, the technology, the training curriculum, the implementation guide, and offered it at cost to hospitals nationwide. It wasn't charity, it was a scalable solution. They presented at medical conferences, not as inspirational speakers, but as operational specialists. For Leo and Ilara, the professional partnership blossomed into something more. It was built not on dramatic rescue, but on shared purpose, on countless late nights and early mornings, on a mutual respect that was as solid as the protocols they wrote. 2 years after that rainy night in the ER, they were married in a small ceremony in the Vance Foundation's garden. Chloe was the flower girl. Alistair gave a speech in halting, carefully signed ASL that earned him a standing ovation. Arthur Green, the man whose delayed diagnosis had sparked the scandal, was a guest of honor. The final, surprising detail emerged in the quiet aftermath of the wedding. Alistair called Leo into his study. He slid a document across the desk. It was a trust fund, not for Leo, but for Chloe, for her education, her future. "This isn't payment," Alistair said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "It's acknowledgement. You gave my daughter her voice back in that hospital, and in doing so, you gave me back my daughter. You showed her that change was possible. That is a debt I can only begin to repay." Leo looked at the document, then at Alistair. The billionaire's eyes were bright. Leo understood this wasn't about money. It was about legacy, about weaving their families together in a way that transcended employer and employee. He nodded, unable to speak. Today, Leo Torres still walks the halls of County General, but now staff wave him over to ask questions, to share successes. The Clear Path protocol is just part of the workflow, like hand sanitizer or patient charts. The crisis that started it all feels distant, a foundational story rather than a present trauma. Ilara runs the foundation's inclusion initiatives with an authority that is wholly her own. And Chloe, now 10, is planning a science fair project on sound waves and how people hear differently. The story that began with a failure of communication, with a silent woman in a busy ER and a watching father, ended by building a new language. A language of policy that works, of technology that serves, and of a simple, radical idea that effective care is impossible without effective connection. The 70% chance of failure has been rewritten, one hospital, one conversation, one pair of listening hands at a time. So what does this story leave us with? Not just a tale of a lucky encounter, but a blueprint for something far more replicable. It shows us that the most profound changes often begin not in boardrooms, but in moments of quiet observation and simple human response. Leo Torres saw a need and had the skill to meet it. That skill wasn't an accident. It was born of love for his daughter. And that love, when applied to a stranger, set off a chain reaction that reshaped an entire institution. The lingering question isn't whether another billionaire is watching. It's whether we are. It's whether we see the gaps in the systems around us, not just in hospitals, but in schools, in workplaces, in our own communities. And more importantly, it's whether we have the courage to build a bridge, however small, across that gap. The 70% failure rate for deaf patients in emergency rooms is not a fixed law of nature. It is the sum of 1,000 small choices, 1,000 overlooked moments. And as Leo and Ilara proved, it can be dismantled, one repaired connection at a time. Their story is a testament to a powerful idea that accessibility isn't a burden or a box to check. It is the very foundation of dignity, and in a moment of crisis, it can be the difference between life and death. The protocols they built are now a tool, but the real tool was and remains empathy translated into action. We leave them now not at an ending, but at a continuing beginning. The work spreads, the model is adopted, and the quiet revolution in care goes on. And somewhere, in another city, in another waiting room, someone else might see a person struggling to be heard. And because of this story, they might just know what to do. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey from a single moment to a movement compelling, consider subscribing. We explore the stories of the unseen architects, the quiet heroes, and the simple ideas that change everything. Until next time.